No one receives telegrams anymore. And yet, he contrived to send one. Maybe that was why I broke off the business that I was engaged in and began with scant preparation the long journey to the house that I had visited so infrequently, and that in my youth. But then nothing in my memories of the house could be relied on, and it was only my friendship with its lord and master, for such he now was by virtue of the near complete extinction of his clan, my most addictive friendship, based on intermittent encounters which exercised what should have been a disconcerting hold over me. And yet, fondly and calmly, I looked forward to our reunion. He had called. I set out, making the payments and arrangements as if in a daze. Whatever I asked for, wherever my itinerary, I knew. Why was this comforting? I knew that my destination would be that house possessed of this singularity, that every visit left radically different memories seared across my mind, as if the hemispheres of my brain had been retrospectively rewired, or however one might currently express that in the commonplace of fiction that is passed off as popular science. So my calmly uneventful journeying drew me ever closer by so many means of transport, closer and closer to the house. My friend's ancestral home was set in a park of sorts. Let the reader understand that every joyous association they might attach to that word park must needs be shed as a preliminary to grasping even something of the abysmal nature of this domain. Thickly wooded, yet silent, yet also alive with many small sounds that betrayed the presence of predatory life. Yet on my final approach, I knew with deepest certainty that I would be received unharmed. That something, be it only the power of my friendship with the master, held back the malice of what passed for nature around me. My way grudgingly opened up before and closed ominously behind me, a murk of filthy, choking miasmas. But I breathed and exhaled naught but the air necessary to life and the gaseous waste of my living. It was as if I was myself looking on, observing myself, a fool in deepest danger, confidently and calmly eager to renew and rebuild my acquaintanceship with the fleeting friend of my youth, now so alone in the world which he had suffered to make his own. And so, my childhood friend, the master of the house, lived isolated and alone in his ancestral home. Alone? Not quite. On a previous occasion, the master of the house has intimated that his stepmother had late borne a daughter, blessed by prodigious growth, who, as sole surviving female, might by the customs of his land still claim herself the whole inheritance which for now was his. Certain conditions must of course be met, primarily an extended period of uninterrupted residence in the house and in its forbidding environs. My friend professed no opposition to her enterprise, but rather concern for her mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, all of which such a sojourn might, in his view, endanger. He, and he alone, he said, possessed through the selective breeding of his line, the capacity to survive there unscathed. Indeed, when I crossed the threshold, I wondered at the holy preservation of his person. The enchantress Time had, as is her wont, worked her curse of lines and wrinkles upon my own countenance as reflected in the mirrors of the place. But for my childhood friend it was altogether different. Though all else was, as expected, translated and reshuffled since my previous visit, the master of the house had, on reaching young adulthood, neglected to accept any further signs of age.
Surely you must be his son.
Your eyes deceive you not, and indeed, for that very clarity, you are summoned to our aid.
Though clarity was in no part of this expedition the state most readily recognized in any part of my consciousness, my firm and early grounding in etiquette compelled me, with what I believed to be an infectious grace, to bow in acknowledgement. Such luggage as I had deposited on entering was by now nowhere to be seen, but before I could descend into anxiety...
Second floor, east wing, top of the stair, dinner at 8. You must be completely at home here.
He initiated an embrace appropriate to intimate friends long parted, yet, when the time came for release, I noticed a cold stiffness. I almost pulled myself free. He bowed again and smiled with perfect teeth and that untarnished visage so illegible to the gaze. I found myself alone atop the stair, then in the blink of an eye at rest, cleansed already from the grime of my journey. I recall nothing of the time intervening before I found myself in the dining room facing the master, the far end of a table far too large for the two of us, or indeed for the third guest for whom a place had been set. We ate, in a silence punctuated by polite questions and brief answers. The fare was rich, though unsatisfying. After 2 courses, I hardly felt I had eaten, though my hunger had entirely abated, nourishment now being an irrelevance. Perhaps my aging, like that of my friend, had for the space of my sojourn in the house been suspended. I smiled at the thought, and for the first time the master's eyes, catching my amusement, sparkled. In that dark and candlelit room, in an unheated mansion surrounded by swamp and forest, there was peace, there was welcome, there was joy.
You are at home here,
said he, in a voice which, for all its affability, brooked no contradiction. I felt the obedience of my demeanour as if manipulated from afar, as I warmly agreed, and felt myself turned aside to a face of pallid scandal, eyes boring into my mouth, a jester's mask, yet animated and twitching with excitement.
May I present the Lady Scrank?
I blinked. A person, apparently even younger than the master, stood before me, pulsating with hidden life. Whether lady or otherwise was frankly a mystery. Something roguishly boyish, at least as I would until then have identified it, adhered to her slight frame. But that was merely the prejudice of one schooled in the performance of roles in the outside world. In the house, gender was an irrelevance. The master's younger sibling and purported rival for his inheritance simply was. Seeking both guidance and reassurance, I glanced over to my friend's nervous smile. Behind his eyes lurked something like fear. Though the strained set of his face was hard put to in concealment. Then, again, we were alone, the master and myself, at tables so well laid with no sign of a servant. I began at last to realize that the armor of ease with which I had hitherto girded my thoughts had joints, cracks, and weak points. After this first encounter with Scrank, for the master never subsequently used or encouraged the style lady, something in me began at last to question that part of my resolve which laboured under the constraints of good breeding. To do the done thing, was that the sole value in which the master now held me? Was my friendship earnestly appreciated or scurrilously manipulated? Lacking an answer, I erred on the side of good etiquette and said nothing. Between what I now became aware were gaps in my memory between meals and the cultural conversations with which the master plied me during all our waking hours. This prandial drama was daily rehearsed. Scrank's behaviour became, if more familiar, nonetheless the more troubling and puzzling. She moved with a twitchy rapidity between rooms, sometimes appearing just out of view and waiting until a chance glance alerted me to her presence, before scuttling off in a direction which, again given the propensity of the house to vary, left me none the wiser. Whereas the presence of the master had always cast a spell of reassurance over me, it was as if in the fleeting company of Scrank, all the cracks in the reality that surrounded him were laid bare. She was his fate, his nemesis, his doom, and yet he referred to her constantly and overtly as
my most beloved sibling.
all the while, with the small cries and vocalizations that intruded through the walls and always tightly bolted windows, the awareness of the latent animosity of the park. Peace then, but never quite reassurance, for nature there was contained, but not tamed, or was it in some dark partnership with the house itself? On one of the few occasions that I can now recall when I found myself at ease in my bedchamber, resorting between audiences with the master to the relatively undemanding company of a novel of mundane life.
Come, catch me, for I have purloined your peace of mind.
And against what even then protested loudly in my mind as my better judgment, I at once gave hopeless chase. Who might conceive of the turmoil in which that vast and unfathomable dwelling lay? Throughout the generations, on the exhaustion of possibilities of one suite of rooms, they had moved on to the next. Yet far more alarming than this commonplace of noble life were the signs they'd left behind. Signs of dissolution, of violence, and instruments of torture not merely antiquarian, but retaining grisly signs of actual use.
Oh, wow. That's fabulous, isn't it? Look, there's a minister blessing the hanged man, right?
No matter. I was possessed by the insane compulsion to retrieve my paper solace from the hands of my tormentor, and unaware of her upward trajectory, confronted her finally at the pinnacle, as it were, of this ever-mutant temple of degenerate family life. Perhaps by then, I should have expected her to be sovereign even over gravity, yet fall she did, and as swiftly as Galileo's feather in his imagined vacuum. By my side at that instant stood calm and unperturbed the master.
We have work to do, my friend.
And, taking me by the hand, he led me down an indeterminate number of stairs until,
stepping outside to the now disconcertingly silent jungle that filled the immediate grounds of the house, we discovered and retrieved the lifeless but bizarrely intact cadaver of his sibling. Neither of us spoke other than to enable these operations to proceed. No tear was shed. Close by, when we re-entered the house, as if long prepared, lay a catafalque and casket of such magnitude as comfortably to accommodate this body. I was dismissed and wandered into the depths of the house, at length emerging into what seemed still to be my bedroom. Yet all the while, as I walked and through the corridors, I tried to rest. There came a hammering, the fastening of the lid of Scrank's coffin with such a surfeit of nails fixing and fastenings. It seemed to exceed by far what would have been necessary decorative, or sad to say, decent. Breakfast. Birdsong intruded into the gloom of the dining room. There was a peace in the house, entirely unlike the peace of morning. My host himself moved about the table, gaily plying me with food and drink more satisfying than any I could recall since I had arrived. The master smiled, and now it was a smile profoundly not covering any other guilty secret.
My once dear friend and future beloved companion, thank you so much for joining me here.
I should leave. It's not seemly that I should intrude upon your grief, nor be a burden to your household.
Leave? Of course not, my dear friend. You are but freshly arrived, and have yet to sample the many delights of my inheritance. You are at home here. No, I absolutely forbid it.
Deep dread overcame me then. Would I ever escape this deadly, cloying hospitality? Each time I tried to speak, my tongue was tied.
And yet...
The master smiled.
More tea? Or even a gram of absinthe? Now that you are not merely a guest, but so fully at home in my house.
Petrified, I suffered him to decant a burning liquid down my throat. My mind required struggle and flight, but my limbs remained obedient only to the hospitality of the master.
Good stuff, my friend? You desire more? Well, I have more, and still more wonderful delights to offer you.
and indeed, he offered me all the intoxication in the world if I would but bow down and submit to him. And what is worse, I was ready so to do, until the sound came.
the master was as one stricken. He cried out aloud and slammed his hands to his ears as he writhed in excruciation, falling badly to the floor before springing up once more and running to bolt the door closest to the source of the offending bruit. Though no cries could be heard. "What have you done?"
Nay, this is your doing! You have brought about the fall of the house! No!
I turned in the direction indicated by his bloodshot sclera to an additional entrance now wide ajar, in which stood Scrank, finger-pointing and furious, yet smiling all the while.
This is my house, and it will do my bidding. This is my house. But for your meddling, our lines should have been long extinct. Right and proper, says Skunk. This house must fall, says Skunk.
And fall it did. As recovering command of my limbs, I abandoned my erstwhile boyhood friend to a destiny he perhaps knew he could never escape, but had sought at cost of my soul to postpone. The ground on which my feet fell as I fled shook, crumbled, rumbled. A great sucking, squelching arose behind me, and I felt as if I was being pulled back down as the very stones and porticos of the house embraced, shuddering, their merited entropy. The stones, bricks, wood, and plaster suffered their final realignment. The jungle of the estate, too, was in uproar, its beastly inhabitants seeking to escape with their lives.
As I did with mine, though scarred and broken, and I alone am escaped to tell thee. And ever as I wake each morning, it is as if roused by that infernal scratching, harbinger of this, that one day my house too will fall.